the more interested I became in how people act around the enormous power of a presidency and how the presidency is shaped by those people. Inside the proverbial room where it happens, do they act authentically or conformingly? Can they speak difficult truths, or do they genuflect to preserve their place in the room? I also began to wonder about those with influence outside the room, the unseen hands who, because of their history, independence, wisdom, or intimacy with the leader, often helped shape and decide the questions debated in the room. Those who, when the heat gets too high, the tension too palpable, the leader can call on for a meal, a game of golf, a late-night phone call, a walk in the park, a respite, so that he can then return to his duties with more clarity and perhaps even new perspective. Of course, this is what friends do, and why would it be any different for people at the highest levels of politics and government? But over the years, as my own involvement in politics and business grew and I gained access to some of those rooms, I began to observe two things more clearly. First, it truly is lonely at the top, and trust, candor, and care for people in positions of great authority and responsibility can be extremely rare. And second, in my own career, much of whatever success I've had was made possible by the true friendships I've forged. My interest in this subject went from a mild curiosity to a revelation in June 1992 when I found myself in an apartment next to the U.S. Supreme Court building interviewing Al Gore, who 10 days later would be nominated for the vice presidency of the United States. This was my fourth stint working for a presidential campaign, and this time I had chosen a winner. Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton, who was on the verge of becoming the Democratic nominee for president. I was one of 5 lawyers assigned by the campaign to vet potential VP candidates. Gore, a second-term senator from Tennessee, was among the candidates on my list. 4 years earlier, after graduating law school, I had actually worked on Gore's unsuccessful campaign to be the Democratic presidential nominee. I got to know him well and admired his intelligence and commitment to the issues he cared most about. The fact that a former low-level staffer was now his primary vetter must have irked Gore as I went about prying into every detail of his political and private lives. The task included weeks of public research and private investigative work, including traveling to Nashville to interview every important person in his life, even his wife and parents. I wrote my final memo to the senior campaign team in Little Rock detailing my findings and waited for word. A week or so later, I was told Gore was one of 4 finalists and I should prepare for a final interview. The campaign brass shrewdly decided that someone older and wiser than a 29-year-old former Gore underling was needed for this sensitive task. They chose Harry McPherson, an old Washington hand, to join me for the last round of questioning. A Texan by birth, McPherson was best known as former President Lyndon Johnson's White House lawyer and chief speechwriter. A tall and stately man who conveyed the easy confidence of someone who had already made his name and neither needed nor wanted anything from anyone. McPherson and I met at his Connecticut Avenue law office. He wanted a briefing to understand the essence of Al Gore. He asked me a number of questions I was ready for, then one that I wasn't. Does Al Gore have any friends? I hesitated before I said anything, slightly stumped. It's a simple question, McPherson repeated. Does Al Gore have any friends? Because it's not clear to me he does, and if that's the case, I'd be concerned. In all the spade work I'd done over 3 months, this wasn't anything I'd given any thought to nor addressed in any of my vetting memos. And yet, I sensed he was on to something far more important than Gore's views on the MX missile or noxious greenhouse gases. Looking back on my first-hand campaign experience with Gore, it occurred to me that I couldn't recall a Billy Shore or a Warren Beatty around. And there certainly wasn't the gaggle of friends like I'd seen already on the Clinton campaign, the famous Friends of Bill who had rescued the Rocky candidate during the New Hampshire primary by traveling to the state to personally reassure skittish voters of his character and integrity.